Well, hello and welcome to another episode of EKU Online's eCast series. EKU Online's mission is to change lives by providing access to affordable and high-quality degree programs in meaningful disciplines that positively impact our society. We thank you for joining us today. Our guest is Dr. Lisa Day, Associate Professor in the Department of English and Director of Appalachian Studies and Women and Gender Studies here at EKU. Dr. Day received her MA and BA from Western Kentucky University and her PhD in American and Multi-Ethnic Literature from Southern Illinois University at Carbondale. She has edited and published extensively, and her scholarship has appeared in numerous publications. Welcome, Dr. Day.
Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate your interviewing me today.
Well, Dr. Day, although you are an associate professor of English, you are now a faculty member in the Department of Anthropology, Sociology, and Social Work, where Appalachian Studies and Women and Gender Studies is housed. Would you take a moment and tell us about these disciplines and their importance here at EKU?
Sure. So my position has had me bouncing around a little bit for the past few years, but I'm very happy to be in the Department of Anthropology, Sociology, and Social Work now. I think it's a perfect home for WGS and APP. So Women and Gender Studies has been around at the university for over 20 years. The program started in '97, I believe, and it's been going strong. Dr. Sarah Ziegler, who is the Dean of the College of Letters, Arts, and Social Sciences, was the second director of Women and Gender Studies. So we've got a strong legacy of pretty powerful leaders of the program, and I'm honored to follow in that path. I've been the director of that program since 2011, and with Appalachian Studies, I've been in the director's office just 3 years now, but I feel as strongly about it and feel more strongly about it every day, I think, as the semester goes on and as the years go on. So Appalachian Studies started a few years after Women and Gender Studies. So both of those programs have been just blocks of the university that have been stable and very popular among our students, especially when they take general education courses, as well as when they add a minor or a certificate in either one of those programs. I think both of them offer perspectives of diversity and inclusion that the students can't find anywhere else on campus. And hopefully the students come away from those classes with an idea not only of their own identity as well as intersectionality and a strong sense of fairness and equity, as well as all of the things they discover about their own identities.
Thank you. Well, this semester you're teaching 2 courses in Women and Gender Studies. And ultimately, what is it you want your students to walk away with after having taken these courses?
Wow, so this semester is pretty interesting, and I really love the way my classes are arranged because I'm teaching an intro class in Women and Gender Studies, and I'm teaching the capstone class of Women and Gender Studies. So I've got both bookends of the program, and it's always exciting to me to meet these introductory students where they are. And many times students are first-year students in that program, in that class, but I've got a few seniors in the class. So it's a really nice mix of students. And then I've got my capstone class on Tuesdays and Thursdays, whereas the intro class is on Monday and Wednesday. And in my capstone class, the students are at the end of their programs, they're getting ready to graduate. So the perspective on world issues, as well as their academic ability and maturity, they're so much different from the 201 class. But hopefully by the end of the semester, each of those classes will come away knowing that they have worked hard, knowing that they have read some of the best material out there in the discipline, knowing that they have written and communicated their ideas and their analyses of the materials in a way that they can be proud of, and hopefully knowing that they have strong information and a strong foundation in women and gender studies and all that it encompasses, not only in gender and not only about women, but about all genders, as well as about sexuality, gender identity, and the full spectrum of identity in those areas.
Oh, very good. Well, sadly, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg recently passed away, and she was certainly a champion for women's rights. Can you speak on how you see her legacy playing out in the future?
Sure. Wow, what a loss. Tremendous loss. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg had become quite a celebrity in addition to her powerful role on the Supreme Court and in our government. I can't imagine working until I'm 87 years old on such an important level of our entire culture. And I think her legacy is going to be multiple. And some of the things that we're going to take away from her legacy include the basic resilience and persistence that she constantly showed in her role as a justice. You know, she was only the second woman appointed to the Supreme Court, and she stayed in that role for, I think, 27 years. She still wasn't ready to stop working, even on the day she died. So sad, but so significant and impressive at a very deep level. I think the legacy that she's leaving in terms of American culture and society, though, is far more important. And that legacy includes the very basics of human rights. You know, she has been frequently called a trailblazer. And I think in that trail that she blazed, she left incredible an incredible legacy of not only equal rights for women and men, but also for human rights, for trans rights, for racial equality and equity. And I think that legacy is stronger than any kind of resistance that is being shown right now. I think she taught the nation how to be civil to each other. And, you know, even though the Equal Rights Amendment was never passed, was never made into law, she did several things that assured that everybody in this country had the rights that the Equal Rights Amendment was trying to achieve. So I think her legacy is going to be widespread, and I think it's going to be affecting the Supreme Court as well. You know, I think now that her voice of dissent won't be there anymore, I think she's left a huge responsibility on the other justices to make sure that they're seeing the point of view that she probably would have raised. I'm reading some information and some speculation that it might even change the makeup of the Supreme Court. I was listening just this morning to a constitutional lawyer who was saying that, you know, maybe it's time to add justices. Maybe it's time to add to 11 justices or even 13 justices like Roosevelt had once proposed. You know, I think the other justices are going to be, you know, the political centrism of the group is going to be shifting a little. So right now, you know, it's the John Roberts Court, and it's fairly right-leaning It has been fairly right-leaning in the past few years, but now it's going to move a step farther to the right. And so I think, Justice Roberts may not be the center perspective as much anymore, because he's always been kind of a moderate, and even though he's on the right side politically, it might shift even farther to the right. So it's going to be incredibly important for an even and balanced court with their decisions to keep in mind what Ruth Bader Ginsburg would have said. So I hope Elena Kagan steps up more vocally. I hope Sonia Sotomayor steps up and speaks out more vocally. And I think we're going to be seeing some changes a lot in the legacy that Ginsburg left.
Well, along these same lines, recently we've seen, well, talking about the political realm, we've seen a lot of traction gained through movements like the Me Too movement and other activism campaigns. What do you think, in light of our political climate, in light of our cultural climate, what do you think their long-term impact will be?
Well, we call it hashtag activism, whereas, most everybody has a social media account of at least one type. Most of us have several social media accounts, and, the hashtag with a word at the end of it has become a very popular way of communicating very briefly an issue or even a topic that the person wants to refer to, in addition to what they've said in the body of their message that they have posted. And Me Too came along much longer ago than the recent news has made it seem. So Tarana Burke in 2008 started that campaign specifically for women of color in New York City who were seeing all kinds of violence with immense impunity of their assailants and of the people who were exacting this violence onto them. And I think with the impact of that whole movement, by stepping up and saying, "Me too," an immense sense of solidarity has happened as a result. If a million women around the country, a million people around the country are stepping up and saying, "You know what? I've experienced that too," and they don't even have to go into detail about the kind of violence or oppression that they have experienced, just by virtue of saying "Me too," it gives that sense of togetherness. No one has to suffer alone through these issues. And by making the issues more public, even without sharing the exact details of it, we're saying there's power in numbers. And it communicates to our culture, our surrounding culture, that we're not going to be putting up with that kind of treatment anymore, that it's wrong. And even if a person hasn't experienced violence or that kind of oppression that goes into the Me Too movement, there are tons of people paying attention to this kind of activism. And in that attention is a level of bystander behavior, so that people are learning more about the impact of violence and oppression on individuals, and all of the ramifications that can happen after such an experience. And the bystanders who are learning about this are now stepping up in greater numbers everywhere. And they're no longer victim blaming. They're no longer saying things like, "Well, why did that woman want to work for that person if she had heard about their reputation?" Things like that. I'm not hearing that as much. I'm hearing more about, let's fix things so that this doesn't happen anymore. let's change this so that the future women and men and all genders who enter this kind of situation in a workplace, in a school, in a government office, where at whatever institution you can think of, anybody who enters that institution after someone has expressed an experience of violence can know that other people around them will support them and that they have a precedent with someone who has already come and gone, who has said for them, violence is wrong. We're not going to put up with violence anymore. And it's time for the impunity to stop. And I think the kind of ramifications on the part of the assailant or the perpetrator is that no one wants to be pointed at like that. And it's this level of accountability in our culture that we haven't seen before. And if it's on the internet, it goes viral like that. And people can put two and two together in terms of who these people are, especially if the survivors don't want to name the person who exacted that kind of treatment. So there's a level of accountability and responsibility and awareness that those of us in the violence prevention movement have been thirsty for many, many years. And I think it's happening. And I think the culture is changing.
Well, I want to shift gears here a little bit, Dr. Day, and I would like to talk to you about Appalachian Studies. There's a stereotypical view of those who live in that region of the United States. And unfortunately, extreme poverty seems to be the most prevalent. In this discipline, what does a student learn that may challenge this stereotype?
Oh my goodness, all the things they learn that will challenge that stereotype is my answer in the short form. I think the major lesson that they gain from our app classes is that Appalachia is not monolithic. Appalachia doesn't have one identity. Appalachia does not have one mentality or one condition. It's as varied as the people are varied. And, we frequently see stereotypes and essentialist treatment of Appalachian people in the media. And, I've always said in all of my classes that I've taught that the Appalachian character in media is often made fun of and stereotyped and treated with this really negative view. And I'm seeing that change as people are realizing that no region of this country is monolithic. No ethnic group or population has one identity. They don't share one identity. There's so many groups within Appalachia, for example. Sure, there is the impoverished group, but there's also artists everywhere, and I define art as very broad. And I'm talking about the quilt makers, the folks who paint their hand saws that they've used over the years or that they've inherited from a grandparent, the musicians who can make music out of anything, it seems, the literature. The literature is so incredibly impactful and powerful in its themes as well as in its character, and one of the two groups within Appalachia that have been seeing a whole lot more attention throughout the region as well as throughout the country is the Appalachian poets and writers. Frank X. Walker out of Lexington and a native of Danville started that group with Nikki Finney and some other folks. And the Appalachian people are finally recognizing, we're a part of this region. We are not outsiders in this region. We have contributed to this region, and we're hoping that the outer cultures recognize that contribution. And I think that's happening quite a bit. The other group that I'm seeing become more vocal and more participative is the LGBTQ group, the population within Appalachia. A lot of people assume that being queer in Appalachia is going to be a reason to leave. Sure, that's true just about anywhere. But what we're seeing in this region is that a lot of LGBTQ individuals are staying in their home environments in Appalachia and creating a different space around themselves and a community that they can invite others into who are like them, as well as the allies and the co-conspirators, as we say. So Appalachia is not just one mentality. It is not just one, distinct community. It is diverse. It is a wealth of experience and art. And I think it's going to be changing, along with all these other things that I've said are changing.
Well, what do you see happening? You're talking about change there. What do you see happening in this region in the next decade or so? I mean, one of the problems is the economic growth, the lack of jobs, and really the region's infrastructure needs a lot of strengthening. Mm-hmm. Do you think these things will be happening soon or in the next decade?
Simply, yes.
Okay.
We have a scholar at EKU, Dr. James Maples, who is a sociologist, and he is from West Virginia. And Tennessee, excuse me, not West Virginia, oops, Tennessee. And his research of the past 5 or so years has been focused on outdoor recreation. And what he has found through some longitudinal work is that the profit margin from outdoor recreation has now surpassed that of coal.
Wow.
Right. Exactly. So he's the one doing that research, and he's right here at EKU. And I think he represents that future that Appalachia is becoming already. I think coal is a thing of the past. Coal jobs are a thing of the past. That doesn't mean it can't show up in our literature and in our art and in our great history and genealogy. But that is a part of Appalachia that is now being relegated to the past, as a tradition rather than an ongoing occupation and industry. And the things that are replacing it are the outdoor recreation possibilities. Everywhere in Appalachia is worthy of visiting because of the massive beauty of the area, as well as all of the opportunities for hiking and, for rappelling and rock climbing and things like that. So the areas in Appalachia that have the great natural resources like the mountains and these wonderful cliff formations and even some areas with caving, they can capitalize on providing more access and starting services like guide work, having a trail guide or a rock climbing guide, to accompany people on their little adventures. So, I think the future is going to be changing with the millennials as well as Gen Z. James Maples, I think, would be considered a millennial. And, he's pointing out all of these opportunities. And I think a lot of people along his generation are effecting these changes. And Gen Z is following right behind them, eager to continue that path and not interested whatsoever in trying to revive coal. They still want to listen to their grandparents' stories, and they still want to somehow preserve parts of their immediate environment that used to involve coal. But, they're interested in making a home and making it vital for their families. So, I think we've got a bright future.
Well, Dr. Day, you have such an interesting background with your expertise is varied among several different disciplines. And I'd like to talk to you for just a few minutes about English, because I know that was your initial start as an English professor. This is a fairly straightforward question, I think, but yet I think a little bit of a challenging one. And is that, and this is it, is reading a lost art? And if so, how do we revive it?
Well, again, short answer, no, it is not a lost art.
Good.
We've got to look at things from different perspectives sometimes. Sure, the written word may not always be on a physical page anymore, but people are still reading. I think of the example just of my own father. He, about 4 or so years ago, bought his first iPhone. He had flip phones in the past, and he reads constantly on that iPhone now. And I love seeing him engaging with news stories as well as blogs and things like that. He was not a reader before. I got all of my reading interests from my mother and from my sister and my other family members, and my teachers, of course. But my dad was not a reader. And, I think that's happening, on a widespread level. I think people are gravitating toward more digital forms of literacy. And we've got to expand that idea of what literacy means. It doesn't just mean the ability to engage with words on a page. It's the ability to see the narratives that exist in all of our digital rhetoric, not just on long sprawling blogs and things like that, but also in just the gaming that people are doing. There is a narrative storyline in most of those now, and I think we've got to embrace the new literacies, and I think it's happening. The English department here at EKU is wonderful, and it's got some, oh my goodness, massive intellect in it still. And maybe that happened after I left, but they're changing things over there so that things are not as traditional, and things don't have the traditional boundaries that we used to have around literary periods or even identities of authors. They're changing things so that all of these new literacies are coming in, and they're part of whatever we used to call the classics. We've said goodbye to those, not wholly, but the syllabi that are being constructed these days do not rely solely on the classics. They're broad and vast in their representation of types of text, as well as identities of authors and genres and everything like that. So I think reading is here to stay. And I'm even fascinated when I hear things like the Amazon Kindle didn't take off as well as Amazon would have wanted it to. People are still buying books. So I think books themselves, the hard copies, like I mentioned earlier, are not going away. But what's happening is that we're expanding the ideas of what a text might be. So I don't think it's a lost art at all. I think it's an expanding art.
Well, with reading and writing so vitally important, What do you feel like is the university's role in improving these essential and critical skills for our students?
And it absolutely is essential. And, I'm loving seeing what's happening with the QEP and, my colleagues from the English department who lead those efforts. This year, I think it's Reading with Purpose. And I think each instructor throughout the university has a responsibility to include reading in their classes, and not just reading assignments to fill up the syllabus, but to engage the students and to spark a lively discussion and questions, and even, to bring up Ruth Bader Ginsburg again, even dissenting points of view. Those are vitally important to the discussion of great ideas. I've often told my students that they're fine if they want to disagree with me, because if everybody agreed with me, it would be a boring world for me. So I think we have to have reading in every single class, hopefully writing in every single class too, so that students are seeing what others are saying, and they're entering this conversation about the great ideas and about the various disciplines that EKU offers students to study. I think EKU is doing the work that our students need to see in terms of expanding their writing and reading.
Well, let's talk a little bit about teaching online. You've talked about reading online and that modality, but about teaching online, what do you enjoy about that mode of education?
Wow. So I admit that I've been one of those who's been reluctant to teach online. I absolutely crave the face-to-face and the physical connection with students in a classroom. So I kind of fought against my own conversion to online teaching. However, I've still done it several times. I've taught several summer classes online. And last spring, in spring 2020, when the pandemic hit, all of us had to go online. And at the time, I admit it was frightening. It was absolutely frightening for me to think of losing that face-to-face contact. And in the spring, I did everything asynchronously so that the students didn't have to be in one place all at the same time, watching their computer screens from wherever they were in the region. So what emerged from that was this sense that I had to be on top of my game the whole time. And I've always been a pretty organized instructor. Every semester that I've ever taught, I've changed my syllabus. And, I keep things interesting for myself, and I try to keep things as current with, trends, as well as, changing emphases in the disciplines that I'm teaching in. So every time I teach a certain course, the syllabus gets pretty drastically revised. So I've always been the type of person who plans every single day of the semester for the students, and I give them this very detailed schedule. But with the online environment, what I have found is that the organizational skills require that sort of preparation at the outset, but it also requires the instructor to invest more time and more energy into discovering the most optimal ways of reaching the students through different modalities and through different techniques And, we can't just be a talking head on a video screen. We've got to mix it up for our students. And we've got to be able to be accessible in all of our materials so that students of different abilities can also do well in our classes, even without the face-to-face contact. We've got to be lifelong learners, first and foremost. And online teaching gives another level of lifelong learning that all of us should be doing.
Well, EKU Online has traditionally been the non-traditional students, the adult learners. How would you compare your experiences with adult learners versus the traditional age college students? Especially in an online environment, do you see any differences or similarities between the two?
Well, anywhere I go, anywhere I've taught, students are students. Students are going to have their own distinct personalities, their own distinct learning styles, and they're going to be at different places along the continuum of their education. I love all of them. I really do. I love this job. I love teaching. And, I've often said, speaking of hashtag activism from earlier, I've often made comments on my social media that says, today was a great teaching day or whatever. And then I'll hashtag dream job. So I love teaching. I love engaging with students from wherever they are on the intellectual spectrum, as well as wherever they are in the world and in their own lives. What I have found from the non-traditional learners is that I've got to be slightly different in my approach with them. For one thing, I try not to talk down to any of my students, whatever age they are, because I want them to know that everyone in my classes is an adult. And I'm going to respect them for their lived experiences and their positionality and their perspectives. What happens with the non-traditional folks, though, is they come in with, we were speaking of books, they come in with the equivalent of bookshelves of life experience. And they can share perspectives on a certain issue that the younger folks won't have had yet. It's inevitable that they are going to be able to add lived experience and their situational perspectives. I also find that the non-traditional students will also be more inquisitive, especially about my requirements for them. They will call out and recognize busy work quicker than any other student will. And it's interesting to me when that happens, and it does happen, because what I realize is that if they think it's busy work, then I need to change that assignment. So they keep me on my toes pedagogically. They show me how to be a better teacher. They show me how to be clearer. They show me what I need to do in terms of why I'm asking them to do a certain type of work and why I'm asking them to read this set of materials. So many times professors imply the significance of a particular assignment, or they imply the significance of knowing about a certain theorist or scholar. What the non-trads do is to make sure I'm making it literal about the significance. I can't, I tell my students, I can read your papers, but I can't read your minds. And I think that's true on the other side as well of the classroom. The students can't read our minds about why they're doing certain types of work. We have to be able to explain and announce literally why it's important that they're doing this work.
Thank you. Dr. Day, as we begin to wrap this up, I want to ask you a quick question here. What would you say to a prospective student who came up to you and said, Dr. Day, why should I pursue a minor or get a certificate in women and gender studies or Appalachian studies? What good is that for me?
You know, our students at EKU, you know, it's a school of opportunity, and our students see their degrees as vocational possibilities. And they want to know that they can get jobs and pursue careers in the areas that they're studying here at the university. And what I can tell them based on past experience with graduates is that the Women and Gender Studies minor or certificate, as well as the Appalachian Studies minor or certificate, can be the key that unlocks them into a certain job. I have so many examples from former students, including a biology major who graduated with a Women and Gender Studies minor. He applied to medical school. He applied to several medical schools. The medical school that eventually accepted him, and he's still in that program, told him outright that when they were looking and reviewing their applications for admission, that all of the applications looked just alike. But his had women and gender studies in it. And his application moved from about mid-range all the way to the top, because he had understood, he had pursued understanding of a distinct population. And they wanted that kind of specialized experience in their medical school, in their students, and in their future doctors. You know, some other examples, Peace Corps. I've had 2 students in the past few years who were able to get accepted into the Peace Corps because of their Women and Gender Studies minor, because it gave them a distinct perspective that the other applicants just didn't have. You know, with Appalachian Studies, you know, I've had the question quite a few times, why is that considered a gen ed diversity class? And every time I answer, students don't realize that they are a diverse population. They don't realize sometimes that Appalachia is its own regional and ethnic identity. So when students are able to dive into their own identities, whether that's Appalachian or whether that's gender identity or sexuality, they are able to understand themselves as well as many others on a level that they would not have known if they hadn't gone through this course track. So I think, you know, jobs and careers, admission into graduate schools in whatever field, as well as deeper awareness of the people around them and cultural awareness as well. So many reasons to pursue a WGS or an APP minor, and I would love to talk to anybody about those possibilities. You know, and a lot of times it's tailored to the individual, and that's what I tend to do whenever a student comes in. I pull up their degree works immediately and I say, let's see how this would work. And we talk through the possibilities and we brainstorm about what kind of career paths they might pursue based on what they've already done and based on what they plan to do with their degrees. So it's endless.
Well, Dr. Day, this has been a fascinating discussion. We've covered so much territory. We just really appreciate your time, and we just look for continued excellence in women and gender studies and in Appalachian studies here at EKU. I just want to thank you again for your time and for just a great discussion this morning.
Thank you so much for having me.